Picture this: a wounded nation, crushed by the weight of defeat and humiliation, where desperate people cling to the promise of a charismatic leader who speaks of glory and rebirth. This isn't the beginning of a novel. It's the terrifying reality of how the world's deadliest conflict began, and how an artist of modest talent would orchestrate humanity's darkest chapter. The story of World War II doesn't start with tanks rolling across borders or planes screaming through the sky. It begins in the shadows of power, discord, and desperation that followed the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 left Germany not just defeated, but utterly broken, saddled with crushing reparations, stripped of territory, and drowning in chaos. The Weimar Republic struggled desperately against hyperinflation and political turmoil, creating a perfect storm of conditions that would birth one of history's greatest monsters. Enter Adolf Hitler, a man who found his footing not through artistic talent, but through the rubble of a wounded nation and the sheer force of charismatic manipulation. His messages of rebirth and glory resonated with a broken-hearted populace, but the cost was steep beyond imagination. Nationalism twisted into a grotesque belief in racial superiority, painting entire communities as enemies of the state and setting the stage for both the Holocaust and the expansions that would engulf Europe in flames. The world received its wake-up call on September 1st, 1939, when German forces invaded Poland with terrifying efficiency. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had already secured Hitler's eastern flank, eliminating his fear of a two-front war. What followed wasn't ordinary warfare. It was blitzkrieg, a brutal combination of tank formations and close air support that shattered front lines and instilled fear across Europe. Britain and France, despite their alliance to combat this regime of chaos and conquest, initially stood powerless as Poland crumbled under this ferocious assault. The heart of Europe fell with stunning speed. France, the proud military power, collapsed in a mere 42 days, a defeat so swift and complete that it resonated across the globe. Paris fell, and suddenly Britain stood alone, isolated yet resolute, preparing for what seemed like inevitable doom. But this island nation had something the Nazis hadn't counted on: unyielding resolve, and Winston Churchill's rallying cry that ignited a spirit of defiance. The Battle of Britain became the first significant check on German might. Under relentless Luftwaffe bombardments, the RAF defended their homeland with incredible prowess, their pilots dancing with death in the skies while their nation held its breath below. This aerial chess match offered the first glimmer of hope amid the engulfing darkness, proof that the Nazi war machine could be stopped. Yet Hitler's ambitions knew no bounds. The launch of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 showcased both breathtaking ambition and catastrophic overreach as German forces swarmed over Soviet territory. The Eastern Front became a vicious theater where ideology clashed with raw human desperation, and millions faced destruction. Hitler's leadership grew increasingly erratic, fueled by dangerous overconfidence as he ignored his general's strategic counsel and insisted on holding territories at tremendous cost. As winter closed in around Moscow, fate began to turn. The Soviets, battered but unbroken, launched their ferocious counteroffensive. German forces, once seemingly invincible, grew weary under relentless Soviet assaults. This sobering reminder of warfare's unpredictable nature came at a devastating cost to both sides, with millions bearing the grim consequences of an escalating struggle. The shocking attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, fundamentally altered the global power dynamics. The United States was galvanized into action, propelling itself into the conflict and solidifying the Allied forces against their common foe. The stage was now set for D-Day and operations requiring unprecedented levels of coordination, sacrifice, and strategy. This gripping saga of World War II reveals humanity at both its worst and finest, a tumultuous time of bravery, horror, and resilience that tested the very spirit of mankind. From the battlefield to the home front, these mind-blowing stories of human endurance and the intricate details of global conflict changed the world forever. defining generations and serving as an eternal reminder of the price of unchecked ambition and the power of united resolve against tyranny. World War II. Part 2, 1941 to 1943. The Turning Tide. The period from 1941 to 1943 marked the most pivotal transformation in World War II, as the conflict evolved from Axis dominance to Allied momentum. This era witnessed some of history's most consequential battles and strategic decisions that ultimately determined the war's outcome. The German invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, launched in 1941, represented the largest military operation in human history. The Nazi forces initially achieved stunning success with their blitzkrieg tactics, catching Soviet forces completely off guard. However, Hitler's fundamental miscalculation lay in assuming the Soviet Union would collapse as quickly as France had fallen. The resilience of the Russian people proved extraordinary, far exceeding German expectations. As Wehrmacht forces advanced toward Moscow, they encountered increasingly fierce resistance. The brutal Russian winter became an unexpected ally to the Soviets, creating an immense barrier that disrupted already stretched German supply lines. German soldiers, woefully unprepared for the harsh climate, found themselves demoralized and ill-equipped for the conditions. By December 1941, the Red Army had regrouped sufficiently to launch a devastating counteroffensive that halted the German advance at Moscow's gates. America enters the war. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, fundamentally altered the global conflict's trajectory. This surprise assault galvanized American public sentiment and military resolve, creating an unshakable determination to defeat the Axis powers. The United States government responded with remarkable speed, mobilizing the nation's industrial capacity and transforming civilian factories into war production facilities. This industrial mobilization would prove crucial in supplying Allied forces with the resources necessary for victory. The Pacific Theater turns. The Battle of Midway, in June 1942, emerged as the first major turning point in the Pacific Theater. American intelligence had successfully cracked Japanese codes, allowing U.S. forces to anticipate and prepare for the attack effectively. The engagement resulted in a decisive American victory, with the U.S. Navy sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers while losing only one of their own. This triumph marked the beginning of a sustained Allied offensive that would systematically push Japanese forces back across the Pacific. Stalingrad, the decisive battle. The Battle of Stalingrad became the most brutal and symbolically significant engagement of the European War. The city, bearing Stalin's name and serving as a vital industrial center, transformed into the focal point of an unprecedented struggle that would determine the Eastern Front's fate. German forces encircled the city in late 1942, initiating urban warfare of unimaginable ferocity. Soviet defenders turned the city's ruins into a fortress, fighting with legendary determination through streets and buildings. Hitler's obsession with capturing Stalingrad proved catastrophic. As winter arrived and supplies dwindled, Soviet forces launched a surprise counteroffensive on November 19, 1942, successfully encircling the German Sixth Army. Cut off from supplies and exposed to harsh winter conditions, German soldiers faced starvation and freezing temperatures. By February 1943, the remnants of what had been a mighty army surrendered, marking Stalingrad as the symbolic turning point of the European war. The aura of invincibility shattered. The implications of Stalingrad extended far beyond military casualties. The German army had lost not only a crucial battle, but also its reputation for invincibility. Soviet forces gained tremendous momentum, pushing westward and reclaiming territory with each subsequent victory. The psychological impact resonated throughout occupied Europe, demonstrating that even the most powerful armies could be defeated through determination and strategic planning. Allied coordination and Mediterranean strategy. At the Casablanca Conference in early 1943, Allied leaders Roosevelt and Churchill unified their strategic approach against the Axis powers. They agreed to launch Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, designed to create a foothold in southern Europe and further destabilize Axis command structures. The successful execution of this operation in July 1943 accelerated the collapse of Mussolini's regime and inspired resistance movements throughout occupied territories. The Eastern Front's largest tank battle. The Battle of Kursk in summer 1943 featured the largest tank engagement in military history. Soviet forces had prepared meticulously, creating defensive positions that proved impenetrable against German assault. This battle definitively demonstrated that the Red Army could not only withstand German attacks, but could decisively defeat them in open combat. Kursk marked the beginning of a sustained Soviet offensive that would eventually drive German forces from all occupied Soviet territory. Strategic overstretch and declining resources. By 1943, Hitler found himself fighting a war on multiple fronts with increasingly stretched resources. Despite mounting losses and strategic reversals, he refused his general's advice to withdraw from untenable positions, leading to catastrophic defeats. Meanwhile, the Allies began preparing for D-Day, employing sophisticated intelligence and deception operations to mislead Nazi forces about invasion plans. The transformation of global warfare. As 1943 concluded, a fundamental shift had occurred in the war's momentum. Allied forces had regained the initiative across all theaters, while Axis powers found themselves increasingly defensive. The brutal realities of warfare had revealed enormous costs in human lives and resources, but they had also demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of democratic nations united against fascism. Lessons in human resilience. This period showcased the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to endure and overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Within the chaos of global conflict emerged stories of innovation, bravery, and hope that would influence future generations' understanding of freedom and democracy. The transformation from desperate resistance to strategic coalition warfare demonstrated how determination and unity could triumph over seemingly superior military forces. Setting the stage for victory. By the end of 1943, the foundation had been laid for ultimate Allied victory. The battles fought during this period had not only shifted military momentum, but had also proven that fascist ideology and military aggression could be defeated through coordinated international effort. The world had witnessed both the depths of human suffering and the heights of human courage, creating lessons that would shape the post-war international order and inspire future generations in their pursuit of freedom and justice. This transformative period established the groundwork for the final phase of World War II, where the accumulated momentum of Allied victories would culminate in the complete defeat of the Axis powers and the emergence of a new world order based on democratic principles and international cooperation. The pages of history unfolded with dramatic intensity as the Allies pushed toward victory during the latter years of World War II. The year 1944 marked a crucial juncture as the cataclysmic battles laid bare the consequences of miscalculations and the unyielding human spirit. Europe was in turmoil, with the Axis powers struggling to maintain their grip on territories they had conquered in the early war years. After the string of victories by the Allied forces, Hitler found his strategies increasingly untenable, especially as the Red Army prepared to reclaim lost territory in Eastern Europe, with unprecedented determination and tactical sophistication. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets surged forward with relentless determination that had been forged through years of brutal warfare. As the winter of 1943 gave way to spring, the Red Army began liberating territories inch by inch, displaying a strategic acumen that had been honed through devastating losses earlier in the conflict. They had suffered greatly, yet learned from their losses, fortifying their ranks and utilizing advanced tactics that overwhelmed the fragile remnants of the German forces. The victories at Stalingrad and Kursk were galvanizing moments that transformed the entire trajectory of the Eastern Front, leading to a widespread consensus among Soviet leadership that the time had come to advance deeper into occupied territories with unprecedented force. The atmosphere of triumf was palpable throughout the Soviet Union. Victories were celebrated in Moscow with grand displays of national pride, and Stalin himself announced the successes with elaborate parades and fireworks, underscoring the Soviet resolve to eradicate the Nazi presence from their homeland completely. In the Western theater, Allied commanders were devising a bold strategy that would fundamentally alter the course of the war. General Dwight D. Eisenhower emerged as a pivotal figure, overseeing the meticulous planning of Operation Overlord, the long-anticipated invasion of Normandy that represented years of strategic planning and international cooperation. On June 6, 1944, D-Day dawned as the largest amphibious assault in military history unfolded before the world, marking a turning point that would echo through the ages. Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy with a ferocity that astonished observers and demonstrated the incredible coordination between multiple nations united in their cause. Despite fierce German resistance and the chilling reality of heavy casualties that painted the Norman beaches red, the Allies established a critical foothold in France that would serve as the launching point for the liberation of Western Europe. The initial landings were marked by chaos and confusion, as is typical in such massive military operations, but there was an unmistakable spirit of unity and purpose among the soldiers who understood the magnitude of their mission. As troops bore the brunt of German fortifications and witnessed their comrades fall around them, they were acutely aware that this was a battle for freedom, a struggle to liberate Europe from the iron grip of tyranny that had suffocated the continent for years. The courage displayed by these men, many of whom were barely out of their teens, became legendary and would inspire generations of military historians and strategists. The subsequent days saw the establishment of secure beachheads and the gradual buildup of Allied forces in the region, creating a logistical masterpiece that allowed for the sustained offensive operations that followed. The push through France was relentless and methodical, with the Allies leveraging their numerical superiority and combined arms tactics to outmaneuver and outfight the Axis forces at every turn. Cities that had long suffered under Nazi control began to flash signs of liberation as Allied forces advanced through the French countryside, bringing hope to populations that had endured years of occupation. Paris, the city of light that had been dimmed by Nazi occupation, witnessed its long-awaited liberators in late August 1944, as the French resistance rose alongside the Allies, helping to topple the Nazi regime in their beloved capital in scenes of jubilation that would be remembered for decades. However, this tide of victory was not without its significant hurdles and challenges that tested Allied resolve. The German military, despite chronic setbacks and diminishing resources, still wielded formidable power, particularly in the form of elite divisions equipped with the best technology and resources available to the rapidly depleting Third Reich. Hitler's leadership descended into erraticism and delusion as he clung desperately to the hope of reversing fortunes, often resorting to irrational demands that strained the capabilities of his increasingly desperate generals. His insistence on holding positions at all costs, regardless of tactical reality, proved catastrophic, leading to heavy losses for his troops and accelerating the collapse of German defensive lines. As the winter months of 1944 approached, the Allies prepared for decisive operations to push the Germans out of France entirely and advance toward the German heartland. In the autumn of 1944, the momentum shifted yet again as Allied forces demonstrated their tactical flexibility and strategic vision. Patton's Third Army executed a lightning-fast offensive through the Ardennes region, catching the Germans off guard with the speed and coordination of the attack. This maneuver would later be overshadowed by what became known as the Battle of the Bulge, a last-ditch effort by the Germans to reclaim lost ground and potentially split the Allied forces in a final gamble for victory. The German offensive in the Ardennes represented their final major attempt to alter the course of the war in the West. Their tenacity was commendable and demonstrated the fighting spirit that had characterized German forces throughout the conflict. But the miscalculation of overstretching their forces and the depletion of their reserves quickly became evident to military observers. The brutal winter conditions in the Ardennes added another layer of complexity to the fighting, creating challenges for both sides that went beyond mere tactical considerations. While the Germans initially sought to exploit the poor weather conditions that grounded Allied aircraft, Allied forces coordinated closely to adapt their strategies and ultimately mount a counteroffensive that would break the German line and seal their fate. By the spring of 1945, the landscape of Europe had shifted dramatically from the dark days of 1940, when Nazi Germany seemed unstoppable. The Allies were now on the offensive throughout most of the continent, advancing toward Germany from multiple directions with coordinated precision, while the Red Army continued its relentless assault from the east with a fury born from years of suffering. The notion of a two-front war, which had been a source of strategic concern for the Germans since their invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, had come fully to fruition in the most devastating way possible for the Third Reich. This perfect storm of military pressure created insurmountable challenges for German defenses, leaving them unable to effectively respond to both fronts simultaneously while their resources dwindled and their manpower was stretched beyond breaking point. Cities throughout the German Reich fell like dominoes as the Allies and Soviets pushed ever closer to Berlin, the heart of Nazi power. The catastrophic loss of both personnel and resources for Germany led to an environment of desperation that permeated every level of their military and political structure. In the German capital, Hitler's inner circle began to fracture under the mounting pressure of inevitable defeat, with high-ranking officials beginning to question orders and some attempting to negotiate separate peace agreements. The Führer himself remained locked in his underground bunker, refusing to accept the clear signs of defeat that surrounded him and continuing to issue increasingly unrealistic orders to forces that no longer existed. His once mighty Reich was crumbling before his eyes. German society was being eroded by the pressures of total war, and the disillusionment was palpable among the ranks of his once loyal followers who could see the writing on the wall. As the Russians approached from the east with their battle-hardened divisions and the Western Allies pushed in from the west with their superior equipment and fresh troops, any hopes of even a negotiated settlement that might preserve some vestige of Nazi power evaporated like morning mist. As April 1945 arrived, the final phases of the European War reached a dramatic crescendo that would mark the end of one of history's darkest chapters. The Russian forces entered and laid siege to Berlin, encountering some of the fiercest resistance yet displayed by the weary but determined German troops who knew they were fighting their last battle. Hitler's delusions persisted amidst the chaos of the collapsing capital, his final speeches filled with proclamations of victory and miracle weapons, as the flames of defeat literally engulfed the Reich around him. Simultaneously, in the West, the Allied forces were racing toward the German capital, determined to ensure a swift end to the war and prevent any possibility of a Nazi resurgence. With the inevitability of defeat becoming clearer with each passing day, Allied forces celebrated their hard-won victories, while simultaneously grappling with the overwhelming devastation that had been inflicted upon the European continent. Entire cities lay in ruins, their historic architecture reduced to rubble, while an entire generation had been lost to the machinery of war, leaving behind widows, orphans, and survivors who bore the physical and psychological scars of conflict. The liberation of concentration camps revealed the horrifying extent of Nazi brutality and genocide, drawing the world's attention to the Holocaust's unimaginable horrors and providing undeniable evidence of the regime's systematic attempts to exterminate entire populations. As the Allied armies moved deeper into Germany, they were met not only with the satisfaction of battlefield successes, but also with the overwhelming moral burden of witnessing the remnants of human cruelty on an industrial scale. By early May 1945, the reality of Germany's total and unconditional defeat became indisputable to all but the most deluded Nazi fanatics. Hitler had taken his own life as Soviet forces closed in on his bunker beneath the ruins of Berlin, and the remaining vestiges of the Nazi regime surrendered unconditionally to the Allied forces. Berlin fell to the Red Army, its iconic structures reduced to rubble and debris, serving as a physical representation of the total collapse of the Nazi ideology and the 1,000-year Reich that lasted barely 12 years. Meanwhile, celebrations erupted throughout Europe and in America as news of victory spread through radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines, as the truth of victory washed over the weary nations who had endured years of rationing, blackouts, and the constant fear of invasion. But even as Europe began the long and difficult process of rebuilding from its physical and psychological scars, another theater of war continued to rage with undiminished fury in the Pacific. The harrowing campaign against Japan represented a different kind of warfare entirely, characterized by the fanatical resistance of Japanese forces and the brutal reality of fighting an enemy who preferred death to surrender. The U.S. military had shifted its primary focus to the brutal island-hopping strategy, which involved systematically capturing crucial islands and airfields that would serve as stepping stones and pave the way for an eventual direct assault on the Japanese homeland itself. The fighting was relentless and savage. Battles like those at Iwo Jima and Okinawa showcased not only the incredible ferocity of Japanese resistance, but also demonstrated the brutality of warfare that American forces were willing to endure in order to achieve victory. These campaigns cost thousands of American lives while inflicting even greater casualties on Japanese defenders who fought with a desperation born from their cultural beliefs about honor and death. The American strategy involved not just reclaiming territory from Japanese control, but also systematically devastating Japanese industrial capacity through strategic bombing campaigns that targeted major cities and manufacturing centers. The introduction of firebombing tactics, which created massive firestorms in Japanese cities built largely of wood and paper, effectively crippled Japan's ability to sustain its wartime industrial efforts. The U.S. military calculated its moves with mathematical precision, knowing that the stakes involved were insurmountably high and that any miscalculation could cost thousands of additional American lives while prolonging the agony of war. This careful strategic planning set the stage for what would become one of the most controversial and momentous decisions in military history: the deployment of atomic weapons against Japanese civilian targets. In August 1945, with Japan's leadership refusing to surrender despite their hopeless strategic position, the United States made the fateful decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The immediate destruction was catastrophic beyond anything previously witnessed in human warfare, resulting in tens of thousands of casualties instantaneously, with many more suffering from the lingering and previously unknown effects of radiation sickness that would claim lives for years to come. The decision to use atomic weapons sparked intense debate within military and political circles that continues to this day among historians and ethicists. Some argued passionately that the use of these weapons was necessary to hasten the end of the war and ultimately save lives by avoiding a costly invasion of Japan that military planners estimated could cost 1 million American casualties, while others viewed the atomic bombings as a horrendous crime against humanity that crossed moral boundaries that should never have been violated. The debate reflected the complex moral calculations that leaders faced when confronting the possibility of ending the most destructive war in human history. As Japan finally capitulated following the atomic bombings and the Soviet entry into the Pacific War, the world bore witness to the dawning of a fundamentally new era in human history, not only marking the end of the most devastating conflict the world had ever seen, but also heralding the emergence of new geopolitical tensions and power structures that would define the latter half of the 20th century and beyond. The immense loss of life and the unprecedented scale of destruction had laid the foundation for what would become known as the Cold War, as the victorious superpowers began to grapple for influence and control in a world that had been irrevocably changed by 6 years of total warfare. World War II had accomplished far more than simply redrawing national borders and changing governments. It had fundamentally altered the very fabric of human society and international relations. The ideologies of fascism and totalitarianism had been vigorously challenged and defeated through the combined efforts of democratic nations, while these same democratic nations banded together in the aftermath, forming international organizations and alliances aimed at preventing future conflicts of such magnitude and establishing frameworks for peaceful resolution of international disputes. However, the physical and psychological scars of war remained deeply etched into the collective psyche of all the nations that had been involved in the conflict, shaping their domestic policies, international relations, and cultural development for generations to come. As the dust of war finally settled across the devastated landscapes of Europe and Asia, The collective memory of the trials endured during those harrowing years would go on to shape national histories, influence political decisions, and fundamentally alter the global conversation about war, peace, human rights, and international cooperation for generations of leaders and citizens who would inherit the post-war world. The profound lessons drawn from the ashes of World War II revealed both the incredible destructive capacity of modern warfare and the equally remarkable power of human resilience. The critical importance of international cooperation in facing global threats, and the unyielding human capacity for both unspeakable cruelty and extraordinary redemption. In the face of unprecedented challenges that tested the very foundations of civilization, humanity had demonstrated an extraordinary determination to rebuild shattered societies, reclaim hope from the depths of despair, and ensure through vigilance and international cooperation that such a devastating and all-consuming conflict would never again be allowed to engulf the world in darkness and destruction. As the war drew to a close, the geopolitical landscape of the world underwent significant transformation, setting the stage for a new era marked by both collaboration and tension. The formal surrender of Japan on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri symbolized the end of World War II. The aftermath of this global conflict saw the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers, fundamentally altering international relations and introducing the potential for nuclear warfare. The spirit of victory across Allied nations masked a growing concern over differing ideologies, particularly between capitalism and communism. This ideological divide would catalyze the onset of the Cold War, a standoff that would dominate global politics for decades. The immediate post-war years were characterized by a sense of optimism tempered by the daunting tasks of reconstruction and reconciliation. Europe lay in ruins. Cities across Germany, France, Italy, and other nations bore scars, both physical and psychological, from 6 years of brutal conflict. The Marshall Plan, initiated by the United States in 1948, aimed to facilitate recovery in war-torn Europe by providing financial aid, stabilizing economies, and fostering cooperation. This initiative not only rejuvenated the economies of Western Europe, but also served as a bulwark against the spread of communism, as nations susceptible to Soviet influence were aided in rebuilding democratic institutions. Meanwhile, the new international order sought to prevent future global conflicts. The formation of the United Nations in 1945 marked a bold step towards establishing a framework for dialogue, conflict resolution, and cooperation among nations. Although not without flaws, the UN represented the first meaningful attempt to institutionalize global governance. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, underscored a commitment to safeguarding individual liberties and preventing atrocities akin to those witnessed during the Holocaust. In this context, the war's legacy was not merely one of military triumph, but also a moral push toward the establishment of human rights as a foundational principle of international relations. As the Iron Curtain descended across Europe, divisions became starkly defined. Countries in Eastern Europe fell under Soviet influence, transitioning into communist states that were politically repressive and economically controlled. This divide was epitomized by the Berlin Wall, which became a powerful symbol of the Cold War and a stark reminder of the ongoing ideological struggle. Eastern European nations grappled with the asserting control of the Soviet regime, which sought to suppress dissent and impose conformity within the bloc. Meanwhile, Western powers, led by the United States, rallied together in opposition through alliances such as NATO, reflecting a deepening commitment to collective security against perceived communist threats. Asia, too, underwent profound changes in the post-war period. Japan, after its surrender, faced a remarkable transformation under the Allied occupation led by General MacArthur. Democratization, land reforms, and the establishment of a pacifist constitution paved the way for Japan's emergence as a thriving, peaceful democracy. However, the fallout from war strained relations among neighboring countries, particularly in China, where civil war reignited between the nationalists and communists. By 1949, The establishment of the People's Republic of China marked the ascendance of communist ideology in Asia, further solidifying the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War era. The legacy of World War II extended well beyond immediate political and social repercussions. The war catalyzed scientific advancements, driven in part by the exigencies of conflict. The Manhattan Project showcased the tremendous capacity of scientific innovation applied toward defense, but also unraveled ethical questions surrounding nuclear weaponry. The legacy of nuclear arms and the specter of annihilation cast a long shadow over international relations, defining a new era characterized by the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which held both nations hostage to the potential for catastrophic warfare. Additionally, the war precipitated crucial discussions regarding colonization and independence, particularly in Africa and Asia. Former colonies began asserting their autonomy, influenced by the principles of self-determination championed by the United Nations. The subsequent decolonization movements redefined national identities, culminating in the dismantling of colonial empires during the 1950s and 1960s. The war's ideological underpinnings instilled a determination among colonized peoples to advocate for sovereignty, reshaping the contours of global politics. In the context of memory and commemoration, World War II became a defining event that shaped collective narratives across nations. In the United States, returning soldiers were heralded as war heroes, an image cemented into the national consciousness through cultural depictions in film, literature, and memorials. These representations often romanticized warfare while glossing over the complexities of the sacrifices made by both soldiers and civilians. In Europe, memorials emerged to commemorate both victory and loss, becoming poignant reminders of the human cost of conflict. The Holocaust also transformed the discourse surrounding genocide and human rights violation, galvanizing calls for accountability and justice that persist to this day. Understanding the implications of World War II demands a nuanced exploration of its multifaceted legacy. Its indelible impact resonates through contemporary geopolitics, social justice movements, and international human rights dialogues. The lessons learned from this global conflict remain vital as humanity grapples with the complexities of governance, collective security, and the challenges of sustaining peace. The specter of total war, while seemingly a distant reality, dictates the necessity for vigilance, cooperation, and a steadfast commitment to uphold principles of justice and human dignity across the globe. As the world progresses into the 21st century, the shadows of World War II serve as both a guide and a cautionary tale. The perseverance displayed throughout the conflict and the post-war efforts towards reconstruction resonate profoundly, reminding us of the resilience of the human spirit against tyranny and the imperative to champion liberty. The multifaceted legacy of World War II continues to shape our understandings, prompting ongoing reflections on warfare, peace, and the human condition, as we strive for a more just and equitable world. The enduring impact of this global conflict remains a testament to both the destructive potential of human discord and the remarkable capacity for renewal and progress in the face of overwhelming adversity.